Hello and welcome to Politics. Today I'm farrukh pitafi. Once again we are going to talk about politics, but not of Pakistan, but geopolitics, particularly Afghanistan situation. Afghanistan, as we have been pointing out, seems to have reached an inflection point where it seems that the US is all prepared to leave on the 11th of September after 20 years of its occupation of Afghanistan, or not 20 years, a little less than 20 years, because the operation started in October in 2001. But regardless, while it is happening, there are rumors, there are suspicions that are being articulated, whatever becomes of Afghanistan in coming days, because it seems that while the US is ready to leave, the talks process or dialogue process between the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan government, or for that matter, the other parties in Afghanistan, has stalled. There were to be an Istanbul conference where both sides were actually to meet, but not only that, there were to be all the stakeholders present there, but that has been put off. And that is not all. General McKenzie, the CENTCOM chief, actually has said that Taliban are not reliable, and despite that they have to actually prepare for eventualities, and they have to pull out of the region as well. Having said that, there are rumors, or at least reports, that the US, while it might withdraw from Afghanistan, might keep some presence in the adjacent areas in Central Asia, and from there they can surveil Afghanistan, and they can use, of course, drones. Interestingly, one statement that was quoted by the authorities in a report that was published from Washington was that when they are withdrawing, they are not merely withdrawing the forces, but it means all the elements. That would include the intelligence operators, other advisors and consultants as well. We are going to talk about all these matters because being the next door neighbor, Pakistan always remains at the center of storm that emanates from Afghanistan. We have to actually ask whether there is any hope of resuming the stalled process, peace process. If not, what becomes of Afghanistan, and what becomes of Afghanistan's influence in Pakistan, because we know that whenever Afghanistan goes rogue, Pakistan is the worst affected country. We are going to talk about all these matters. In order to help us understand these issues in the studio, I'm joined by Dr. Nazir Mahmood, who is a columnist and also an expert on international affairs. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for being part of the program. Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodi, former Defense Minister and NSA, joins us. General Saab, thank you very much for being part of the program as well. And Michael Kugelman, an expert on the regional affairs, joins us from Washington, D.C. Michael, thank you very much for being part of the program. With the permission of both the gentlemen on Skype, I'm going to start with the guest in the studio, Dr. Nazir Mahmood. Let me ask you, how hopeful are you that the talks are going to resume?
Well, I am hopeful.
Okay.
Because there is no other option for anybody.
Okay.
Not even for Taliban.
Okay.
So I am hopeful, and especially the Turkish announcement is about the postponement of talks.
Right.
They have not cancelled it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would have simply said it's cancelled. And then in Turkish announcement, they have further expressed hope that after Ramadan, the talks may resume. So that's what gives me hope.
Okay.
Having said that, from the Taliban side, they have been very adamant and clear that they want an immediate withdrawal, and they consider it as breach of the agreement which was signed last year in February 2020. So Taliban's position is a bit stubborn, but I think that all other powers, all other players are are interested in continuing the talk. Be it China or Russia.
Does it appear to you that the Taliban position is not only stubborn, it is pernickety, because they keep on nitpicking. Otherwise, the momentum or shift is only a few months. I mean, from May to September is not a great deal. So why is it that Taliban are behaving in such a manner?
I think we can draw parallels from two past examples.
Right.
One was 1975 Vietnam,
Okay.
and the other was early 1990s Kabul.
Okay.
So if you just to remind our viewers and ourselves also, in 1975, of course, American forces withdrew. They had to withdraw, but at that time, from North Vietnam, they had a regular standing army, and they had support from both China and USSR at that time.
Okay.
So at that time, it was easier to occupy South Vietnam, and American forces withdrew completely, and then the game was over. But you know, that cannot happen now.
Okay.
That will not happen. Why? Because Taliban do not have, at least openly, they do not have support from China or Russia.
Right.
Even Pakistan is saying that Taliban should be negotiating.
I resent the even that you used. Even Pakistan says, right? But allow me to actually bring in Jadal Saab first. Jadal Saab, your take on the possibility of peace process resuming very soon. If it is going to take place after Ramzan, the concern is that we only have so much time. That would mean the time for negotiations will be condensed. Do you think that all the elements in Afghanistan have enough time to actually wait for this liberal time frame, sir?
Thank you. If you allow me, I'll just make one or two comments before I answer your question.
Please go ahead.
And the first is that whatever I say, my premise is on certain factors. The first is that Americans are not leaving Afghanistan by choice. I just stop here. Secondly, even if they leave, they would like to have a lot of influence in Afghanistan through other means. 2. 3. Americans never wanted peace in Afghanistan, and they do not want peace in Afghanistan. And we can have a separate debate on that. So my premise is on these three factors. The other thing is, I'm surprised that you are blaming Taliban for not going for talks, and nobody talks about Americans who have violated their treaty with the Taliban. They were supposed to leave by 1st of May, and they say that now they will be leaving by 11th September, and not a word is being said. That unilaterally they have decided that they will breach the treaty and go whenever they wish to. So I think there will be no talks till the Americans leave, and once the Americans leave, because in my assessment, Ghani will not be there, so the talks will be there, but between some other factions. As far as talking is concerned, just a minute.
Questioning my question, sir, because my question was humbly that if there are two parties and one party refuses to hold talks, then one has to ask what exactly is going on. I'm not putting onus on one party. I'm just asking, what do you think Taliban is thinking? Because it is, you are right that it is a change, but we know that the government changed in America, so there had to be a shift, and it is only a few months shift, right, sir?
Right. I think just saying that it is a few months shift or one day shift, but at least you should be saying as an anchor that they have violated the treaty as far as American is concerned. Anyway, leave it there. It is the ground situation which puts all the factors that how the talks will go. Now, once the Taliban know that Americans are going, in my assessment, they feel no pressure to talk to Ashraf Ghani anymore. Talking is going on. Haven't you seen what Russia hosted talks, and everybody has been coming to Pakistan one by one? What were they doing? These are all talks going on between various factions as far as Afghanistan is concerned. So talks are in progress. But if somebody thinks that after the Americans leave, Afghan Taliban will talk to Ashraf Ghani, that is a great expectation. That is not going to happen. They will be talking to many other factions, but not with Ashraf Ghani.
When Jalal Sahab, I come back to you, I'm going to ask whom they are going to talk to. But let me bring in Michael Kugelman. Michael, you are listening to the commentary that is going on. The same question to you. Do you see if there is any hope for the resumption of dialogue process, peace process? If not, What exactly is it that is driving the wedge and actually deciding that Taliban don't come back to the negotiation table?
Yeah, well, certainly the peace process is going to be a lot more challenging. Though we knew this. I mean, with U.S. forces leaving, that was going to give the Taliban a very nice battlefield opportunity or battlefield advantage. And knowing that all foreign forces are on their way out makes it easier. It gives them a stronger incentive to just focus more fully on the fight. But I think we won't know for another few months until all U.S. troops have left the country by September. That's when we'll know what the real potential for peace is, because that's when the Taliban will have gotten what it's always wanted, for U.S. troops and foreign troops to be gone. That's when one would expect the Taliban, if it were really interested and committed to peace, that it would finally be willing to sit down with the Afghan state. But we'll see. And I think that a lot of it comes down to the issue of legitimacy. If the Taliban really believes that if it really wants credibility, recognition, legitimacy from the world, it's going to have to sit down and be committed to a peace process. Because if it wants legitimacy and it refuses to sit down with the Afghan state and negotiate an agreement, and it decides to just focus on continuing to fight and trying to seize power, well, it's going to be pariah once again by the world.
Michael, I'm glad that you actually brought up the issue of legitimacy. Do you think that legitimacy matters at all to Taliban?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure it does. It says it does. I think it did matter to the Taliban when it was working on negotiations with the U.S. to get the agreement on the troop withdrawal, which it had always wanted. But now it's in a situation where it's got what it's always wanted, and I'm not necessarily sure it's going to care as much about the issue of legitimacy. And you look at what it's done over the last few months and over the last few weeks. It's continued to refuse to reduce violence, and it's continued to refuse to really cooperate in ways that much of the world would like it to, such as by refusing to attend this conference in Turkey, which has now been postponed because the Taliban didn't agree to participate in it. It's continued to carry out horrific attacks, including this target-killing campaign against civil society. It hasn't claimed those attacks, but it's clearly behind those attacks. That does not suggest to me an organization interested in being seen as a credible and responsible peace partner. But again, let's wait to see what happens, certainly in the next few weeks, but especially in September, when all foreign troops are gone. That's when
Michael, as a student of political science and as a student of international relations, maybe waiting for that date to see might actually fulfill our curiosity or answer our curiosity. But we are talking about human lives here, right? And we are talking about region which is even without Afghanistan quite volatile. Let me actually bring the discussion back to the studio. I'm going to come back to you as well. Dr. Nazir Mahmood, who has the influence on Taliban to convince them to actually come back to the negotiation table? Will that happen at all? In the past, we used to hear it is perhaps Pakistan, but then we saw that there were multi-layers. One, Iran played quite a crucial role, right? And then Russia also became very influential, and not to forget, Central Asian neighbors are also quite influential, especially Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So, who can actually influence the Taliban right now?
I think you're right that all these powers do have some influence, and interestingly, all these like Iran is essentially anti-America. You know, so they would not like a reasonable or respectful exit of the American forces and the continuation of the regime that was essentially installed by America.
Right.
We know that Ashraf Ghani is installed there by the forces. If the forces withdraw, it will be difficult. Like General Saab said, it will be difficult for Ashraf Ghani to continue.
Right. It is a hostile power, hostile to the U.S., but it is also a power that in the past has worked with the U.S. in Iraq, especially when it was Obama's time, right? If you remember the way government was created there, and all of a sudden Iran started actually influencing a lot of things. Don't you think that Iran will actually want to play ball, especially when they are about to resume the JCPOA follow-up?
Yes, of course. Iran has its own interest there,
Okay.
and it all depends on how Joe Biden administration. Though initial signals from the Biden administration are positive
Yeah.
towards Iran also, and they participated in Moscow talks, which
Right.
was unprecedented. When Moscow invited everybody, Moscow talks were a positive step. Why? Because almost everybody participated there.
Right.
So this was why, and then India was excluded.
Yeah.
Probably rightly so, because India does not have borders there, and Pakistan has also reservations about India getting involved there. So coming back to that, who has the influence? To some extent all, but I think most of all Pakistan
Okay.
does have. To a greater
Pakistan has
extent.
influence.
Yes, I think greater than Iran or even Russia. Why? Because there is for the past 20-25 years. There are certain, we know in 5-year rule, Taliban government, Pakistan, UAE and Saudi Arabia, these were the 3 countries that had recognized
But
Taliban as a legitimate government.
Right, sir. Dr. Saab, but that is ancient history. Remember Mullah Zaif's autobiography. When he writes, he is not actually remembering Pakistan with very kind words because of the post 9/11 situation. So I don't know. I have to ask others as well, with your permission. Does Pakistan have the kind of influence over Taliban, General Saab, or there are other factors which might be influential here?
I think Afghan Taliban, as we know them, are fiercely independent people, whereas they might listen to some of the requests from other countries, but they have been independent in their operations, they have been independent in their thinking. So I don't think they will be in certain areas, in some of their principles, they are not going to listen to anyone. For example, if anybody tries to push them to accept the present regime and join them, that is never going to happen, whether it is Pakistan or whosoever. But I think combined efforts of Pakistan, Iran, China, Russia, and the neighboring Central Asian countries, as you mentioned, that will work. And that is why I always say that this time that sort of vacuum will not be there as it was 20 years back, because Russians left and Americans left and there was nobody there. Now Americans are leaving, Chinese are there, Pakistan is there, Iran is there, Russians are there, Central Asian countries are there. They would help them to resolve their issues. Ultimately what will happen is that there will be a small civil struggle, then there will be some interim setup, not the present one. Then there will be a grand jirga. Then Taliban, they will talk to Karzai, they will talk to Abdullah, they will talk to Engineer Hikmat Yar, they will talk to Uzbek, they will talk to all factions, and there will be a consensus government. But Taliban will be the major stakeholders in any future political setup.
Right.
That is written on the wall.
And that is quite intriguing what you are saying, General Saab, because if I'm actually wargaming from the side of Taliban, it would definitely actually multiply the problems that I have to face. Speaking to one government in Kabul is easier than speaking to too many groups that you have just pointed out. And in the end, if some concession is given by Kabul to Taliban officially now, it is going to hold, it will have legitimacy in the coming days as well. Is it not true?
Actually this talking which I am talking about of all these groups which you also mentioned, I have mentioned, this talking is not going to start now. This talking started 3-4 years back. There has been 2 meetings in Moscow, 2 years back and 1 year back, and then this present one also. So I think this talking is an ongoing process, and Taliban have been talking to all these factions which I am mentioning for quite some time. And you are right that it will not be easy for them to do that, and that is why I mentioned that these 4 countries, China, Russia, Iran and Pakistan, because each of these countries, they have certain interest in Afghanistan, and unfortunately some of them, they back some of the factions inside Afghanistan. So unless all these 4 countries and some Central Asian countries, they help Afghan people to come up with some solution, it will be very difficult for them. So there's no vacuum. There will be a small struggle. There will be many people, many countries will be helping them. And I think Taliban have also learned their lessons. there will be government, mixed government, with Taliban being the main actors.
Right. Let me ask Michael Kugelman. Michael, do you share General Saab's candor and his worldview that there is going to be this kind of struggle, and in the end there will be negotiation, but not between Ashraf Ghani government and Taliban?
Yeah, I think that Ashraf Ghani, the walls are closing in on him. He's increasingly isolated at home. His rivals, I think, are really emboldened and empowered, and they see him as an obstacle to the peace process because of his opposition to a new interim government. And then the U.S. is pressuring Ghani to agree to things that he doesn't want to agree to. I don't know what's going to happen to him. But he's made it very clear that he is not going to leave power unless he's voted out in an election. So, we'll have to see what comes of that.
But he has spoken about early elections as well, right?
Correct. Yes. I mean, he's put out, or he's claimed he's going to make a peace plan proposal that would call for elections. But the Taliban has already rejected that plan because it rejects elections, or at least in the way that he's laid them out. So I think that I think that Ghani is, quite frankly, on a collision course. I'm not sure how Washington plans to work with them. I mean, clearly it agrees that it can't work around him. He is the president of Afghanistan. There have been some conversations. There have been a number of conversations between senior U.S. officials and Ghani. Biden spoke to him finally for the first time recently. You had that visit by Secretary of State Blinken to Kabul a few days ago, which I think is important. But I think that the U.S. views two major obstacles. One is Ghani and one is the Taliban. I don't want to draw equivalency between the two for sure, but I think that the scope of the challenges of the peace process moving forward are encapsulated by the fact that you not only have a resistant Taliban, but an obstacle in the form of the president of Afghanistan as well. And that's going to be very difficult to move forward with.
Obstacle in the way of what, sir? Withdrawal? They can withdraw any fine day?
Peace.
Peace, yeah. Well, I mean, certainly Ghani does not want U.S. forces to leave, but he recognizes that's going to happen. But I think that Ghani has been so insistent that certain things must happen first, such as there being elections before there be an interim government. Whereas for the U.S. and other key capitals, the Russians and others, as well as perhaps the Taliban, there's this view that you need to have some type of new interim government to oversee the peace process. And the Taliban, if it were to accept that interim government, it would need to not include Ghani. And of course, Ghani wouldn't want that.
Michael, you have just piqued my interest right now. I'm really intrigued. You said that the Afghan Taliban are not ready to actually support the idea of elections, and that's why they have refused to accept Ghani proposal. The question is, what exactly was happening in Doha if these basic elements were not agreed upon?
Well, that's the point. I mean, nothing had really progressed in the Doha negotiations. There was an agreement on procedural elements of the peace talks, and then the two sides were just starting to talk about what would be on the agenda. But then I think both the Afghan state and the Taliban decided to step back and wait to see first who would win the U.S. election. And then once Biden won, there was a desire on both sides to get a sense as to what Biden's policy would be in Afghanistan. So I think both sides were willing to slow walk the negotiations. But indeed, not much has happened with the Doha negotiations. Yes, you had the agreement between the Taliban and the U.S., but with the Afghan state and the Taliban, there hasn't been much progress at all, other than this procedural accord that essentially dictates how the two sides will go about in very technical terms the negotiations. But nothing substantive has happened to this point.
That's intriguing because we are talking about, a peace process, Dr. Saab, the basics of which are not settled. How do you actually go about that peace process?
Well, some of the basics were set. I think the February agreement last year, which Trump administration signed, I think, though I didn't like Trump, but at least I think this agreement was a positive step forward.
Yeah, it is not about liking or disliking.
It's not about liking somebody, but at least that Feb agreement, I think it had some positive points. So some basics were settled there. How? The only problem with that agreement was that Ashraf Ghani was not involved. The Kabul government was not involved.
Yeah.
But the commitments that were made by the Trump administration, especially about the release of Taliban prisoners, to a great extent, initially the Ashraf Ghani government, Kabul government was reluctant to release those prisoners, but then in a couple of months they relented and they started releasing those prisoners. Thousands of prisoners have been released, which was a positive signal, and Taliban should have taken that positively. But what they did, they kept striking, they kept attacking, even civilian populations were attacked, hospitals were attacked. Now, when you keep attacking and there is no ceasefire, that gives a wrong signal. They also, you know, if they want to be seen as serious negotiating party, they have to build their own image also as peace-loving people. Right now, at the moment, they are not known as a group which actually wants peace. What they want, they are replicating. This reminds me of Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, when Soviet forces left in Feb '89. The others were, you know, trying to settle the issue. But Gulbuddin Hikmatyar tried to occupy Jalalabad. And our General Hamid Gul later on kept boasting that he was the one who played an important role in that. And that was a fiasco. Jalalabad attempt to conquer Jalalabad. That is, I am talking about March '89.
We have to move forward, not backwards in time.
So why I am giving that example? Because after Najibullah resigned in April '92, they could have settled the issue. They refused. Who? Gulbuddin Hikmat. And the same Taliban are repeating the same mistake. What they are doing, they want to control the whole Afghanistan without sharing power, which is wrong approach.
And that actually astonishes me, because we are talking about circumstances where COVID is very influential. It is affecting every country in the region. It cannot happen that Afghan Taliban are not being affected by such a pandemic. It must have undermined their strength as well. And yet this insistence on confrontation seems to be huge, that they no matter what, they want to keep on fighting. We heard that Taliban are changing also. Their younger generation actually want to play PUBG and use mobile and do different things.
That's why I say that Taliban are standing at the wrong side of history. In the 21st century, they want to re-establish a theocratic government. They want to re-establish a 1,000-year-old system. That will not be acceptable by majority of Afghans.
Because there is a constitution.
There is a constitution, and you know, in the past 20 years, others have changed. You know, when this Karzai government came to power, even people like Sibghatullah Mujaddidi, even the Burhanuddin Rabbani, even Rashid Dostum, all those previous warlords, they came together and, you know, they took part in the new government. And Taliban are the ones who are not, who don't want to participate, who just want to occupy Kabul and control the whole of Afghanistan, which will not be possible.
How influential these 20 years have been is proven by the fact that over 40% of population, Afghan population, is under 15 years.
Exactly.
That they were born after the occupation and all, right? And the new government. Let me go back to General Saab. General Saab, the question is, you said that the US was never here to actually build peace, and it doesn't care. So we keep on putting a lot of onus on the US, right? The question right now is, if it doesn't have any skin in the game, it can just shrug its shoulders and walk away. Who's going to stop the US from withdrawing without providing any kind of solution?
The first thing to understand is that Afghanistan is a complicated situation and there are many detractors. So, because Dr. Saab has mentioned at least twice that Afghan Taliban are attacking civilian population, whereas in fact it is not. Afghan Taliban have not taken any claim of attacking any civilian. There are other actors who are doing that and then pointing the fingers at Afghan. And this is a false flag operation. I will not go into the detail. Yes, whatever Afghan Taliban are doing, they are claiming it. They are attacking the Afghan forces. They are attacking the Afghan officials.
Just to clarify, those attacks are not claimed by the Taliban's spokespeople?
They did. Some of them they did.
No, not at all. That can be checked, and we will not go into those details. Why should they be attacking the civilians? The other thing is that you see, Afghan Taliban have fought for 20 years just to make sure that this constitution they do not accept. And they did not accept this constitution in the presence of forces which were so strong, 100,000. And now we expect that they should now. And one thing I must clarify, that as far as Afghan-Taliban worldview is concerned, I also do not agree with them. But that is beside the point. Whether we agree with their worldview or not, we are not discussing that. What we are discussing is the ground situation and what turn it is likely to take. The ground situation is that Americans, they abandoned Ashraf Ghani, and that is why they talk to Afghan-Taliban without Ashraf Ghani. Ashraf Ghani should realize that, I mean, if not today, he will realize it tomorrow. So anyone expecting that after Americans leave, Afghan-Taliban, after fighting such a long struggle, will accept all that for which, against which they fought, is a very naive thinking. It will not happen. They will have their own way, and of course they have learned their lessons. They will talk to all the people which I am talking about. There will be a grand jirga. There will be an interim government, but not this constitution will not be there. This government will not be there. There will be another interim government.
Hang on, sir. Since you have spoken twice about the constitution not being there, I understand the governments keep on changing, but constitutions usually ensure fundamental rights of people. And we know that the Taliban have a history, and you said that you don't agree with the Taliban worldview. Taliban have the history of not giving women their due right.
I would like to add something.
Yeah, please do, but let me finish the question. And despite that, you are saying that the constitution is going to go away. So who is going to actually, what kind of future constitution are you seeing in Afghanistan?
Okay, we must look at the history of this constitution. Twice or three times elections have taken place in the presence of occupation forces. So what is the legitimacy of those elections? And what is the legitimacy of that constitution which was made by the members who got elected through such elections? And once we talk of, things that people are, younger generation is doing this and that, we are actually talking of Kabul and some major cities. 60–70% of Afghanistan is under the influence of Taliban one way or the other. And we never happen to go there, not me, not you, not even Dr. Saab. So just meeting people in Kabul and coming back and saying that they do this and they do that and they hate us, and this is not the complete picture of Afghanistan, my dear.
Okay.
Afghanistan's complete picture will emerge now.
No, sir. It might not be the complete picture of Afghanistan regarding the constitution. A former king actually presided over the lower jirga, which actually okayed the system, which eventually culminated into that constitution and democratic process, whether it was democratic or not. I have to go to Michael, but if you want to add, please do very quickly. You said you wanted to come in.
Go to Michael. Later on I will cover that.
Right. Michael, at this moment we are looking at this proclamation, this announcement that the US is going to withdraw on 11th of September. Do you think that it is something which is set in stone, or it can be revisited in coming days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so. I think it's unlikely that the administration would go back on its word. For one thing, if it stayed on beyond September, the Taliban would definitely redeclare war against the United States. So there has not been one single U.S. combat death in Afghanistan over the last year. But I do think that if things get to a point where U.S. forces have left, and the perceived threat of terrorism in Afghanistan is rising, and if the administration believes that there is very real reason to worry that U.S. interests outside of Afghanistan, including in the United States, could be threatened by a terrorism threat in Afghanistan, at that point we cannot rule out the possibility of the administration looking into the possibility of sending a small number of counterterrorism focused troops back to Afghanistan. Extremely unlikely, though. It would not play well politically in terms of public opinion in the U.S. And certainly, if the U.S. did that, especially if it did that overtly, not covertly, I think that, again, you could risk a fresh conflict with the Taliban, which would only make a war that's already spiraling out of control all the more difficult to control. But I do think that Joe Biden, he has never been comfortable about staying in Afghanistan. But he has always looked at Afghanistan through a counterterrorism lens. So if he concludes that, the terror threat in Afghanistan that he claims is not significant now if he changes his mind and concludes that the U.S. could be in trouble based on terrorist threats in Afghanistan, that's where we can't rule out the possibility of the administration looking into sending some forces back.
Yeah, I understand the position, but regarding the money that the U.S. Has spent already in Afghanistan in trying to build peace, democracy and state building or nation building in Afghanistan, do you think that somebody tomorrow is going to hold the current administration accountable for abandoning all that investment because it didn't bear fruit? Afghan peace building is gradually slipping away.
But you know, Farrukh, I don't think those were the main objectives of the U.S. It was never in Afghanistan to create stability, well, it wanted to bring some degree of stability, but its formal goals in Afghanistan were always focused around counterterrorism. The initial goal was to eliminate the Al-Qaeda sanctuaries, and after that, it never really clearly articulated why it was still in Afghanistan fighting a war, which is one of the reasons why the U.S. war effort went so bad. It's hard to wage a war successfully if you don't know why you're fighting it. But I think that we shouldn't overstate the risk of those types of factors. For the U.S. government, and not just for the Biden administration, but future governments as well, the main concern will revolve around terrorism. To what extent does Afghanistan, with no U.S. troop presence, pose a threat to the United States, and particularly U.S. interests outside of Afghanistan, including the U.S. homeland itself? I think that's the proper frame through which
that is the question. Right. Let me ask Dr. Nazir Mahmood. Dr. Saab, you want to come in? First, the point you were making earlier.
Yes. I would just like to comment on the constitution thing, and General Saab mentioned that, Taliban worldview is irrelevant here. I think precisely that is very relevant because when we talk about constitution, a constitution essentially represents a worldview.
Yeah.
And in the past 40 years, Afghanistan has had two constitutions. One was in 1987, when Najibullah took over, they tried to change it because the war was going on. Initially, they tried to establish a socialist government, but then Babri Kalmat was removed, and when Najibullah came over, they tried to slightly Islamize it. But even that didn't work.
Yeah.
Now, this constitution, which was made in 2003 and 4, that was the result of a jirga, and mind you, the head of that jirga was Sibghatullah Mujaddidi, none other than Sibghatullah Mujaddidi, who was one of the Mujahideen groups who were fighting against, and then he made sure that the constitution of 2003 and 4, because why I'm saying 3 and 4, because the negotiations were held in December 3 and the constitution was signed in January 2004, and in that Sibghatullah Mujaddidi himself, he changed so many clauses and tried to make it based on Islamic principles as much as possible.
Right.
So if that constitution, but still they retain some fundamental rights to women, for example, protection of human rights, protection of fundamental rights. These things are there. And what Taliban want, if Taliban do not accept even that constitution, that's why I'm saying that they want to establish a theocracy.
Okay. Right.
That's why I'm saying that they are standing on the wrong side of history.
Right. Dr. Saab, because we are nearing the end of the program, let me actually ask you to actually start concluding as well. Your conclusion is needed here, but let me add something too. And that is particularly about the similarity of language. When President Biden was actually speaking, announcing his intention to withdraw from Afghanistan, the term was used forever wars. I mean, that was quite, common during Donald Trump's time as well. Do you think that when you look at the overall perception of Afghanistan, there is near consensus in the U.S. that Afghanistan has been a lost cause and they have to actually pull out no matter what?
They have to pull out.
Okay.
They will, and as other speakers also mentioned, that they will withdraw all the troops. Yeah. I am sure that by 11th September this year, they will draw all the troops. But contractors may remain, I think. And contractor means maybe there will be some mercenaries, private contractors who fight for money. Yeah. And the American government is not answerable for them. If an American soldier dies, the government is answerable to the public. But if a mercenary goes and dies, the mercenary comes for money. You know,
Okay.
so that is the possibility.
You're talking about mercenaries like Eric Prince.
Maybe, you know, there are
It
various
was his
contracts.
project, if you remember. Pull out and make me the Viceroy or Governor General of Afghanistan. Do you think that kind of
No,
a
no, that
project?
will not happen, but there may be some presence, and then across the border in Central Asia, America might retain or establish some new bases. Tajikistan needs money, Uzbekistan needs money, and if they offer good money, I think they will allow them to use, you know, establish a base, so that if Taliban come closer to occupying Kabul, there might be retaliation from America.
Right.
So now conclusion, in conclusion, I will say how I see the next few months. I think after Ramzan, other powers including Pakistan has been playing a positive role trying to convince Taliban to rejoin the negotiations. So I think after Ramzan this pressure will work, and Taliban will ultimately, and they should, they will join the negotiations, and I am hopeful that a power sharing formula may be worked out, and if Taliban refuse, that will be another disaster.
Right. General Saab, your conclusion, sir. One more thing though. You earlier said that their worldview is not relevant here. As someone who is sitting in Pakistan, the concern actually, what occurs to me is that we have been battling with radicalization for past many years. And the possibility that a dominant Taliban government in Afghanistan might have similar kind of radicalization influence on Pakistan is a serious one, given what we have endured in the past few days.
Remember APS?
APS and what we have endured in past few days as well. General Sahib, when you are concluding, please address this issue as well. How should Pakistan take care of the
What I was saying is that without going into this political discussion, that if the main dispensation in Afghanistan is Taliban heavy, then what will happen to Pakistan? That is altogether a different debate, and we can do it some other day. What I was saying is that looking at the dominant military power of Taliban after the Americans leave, there's no way that they are going to accept anybody else's, diktat. It will be a combined government, of course. There will be peace. And let me say one sentence: leaving of Americans from Afghanistan is a precursor of peace, not a spoiler of peace. If Americans had been here for the next 40 years, there would be no peace. But once they leave, there will be, peace on the horizon. And that is the only way that once the occupation forces leave, then there can be peace in Afghanistan. Yes, one last thing I would say, we are having a thought of democracy, if not proper democracy. They will be having a thought of theocracy, if not proper theocracy. If they succeed in giving justice and good life to their people, they will prevail and there will be spillover in Pakistan. If we succeed in
General Sahib,
giving
I
our
don't know
people
why
justice and
did you
people,
have to turn the gun on yourself?
That's why I fear. That's why I fear.
No, but he said that we are having sort of democracy, not democracy. So, with due respect, I disagree with that. Michael, your conclusion, sir. And please add to your conclusion a statement or message. If, for example, Afghanistan's 15, 16, 17 years old who are more than 46% of the population, if they are listening, what do you think the U.S. message is going to be to them?
Well, I think that one of the most important U.S. messages to pretty significant component of the Afghan demography is that the U.S. is leaving, but it's not really leaving. That there's still an intention to provide financial support to keep national institutions strong and to provide diplomatic support to keep a peace process going. I think that's an important message. That's the message that Blinken brought to Afghanistan when he was there a few days ago. But certainly, there are many Afghans that are much happier seeing U.S. forces leave. And I think there's not much that Washington can say to that. Just accept that there are plenty in Afghanistan that believe the U.S. has worn out its welcome in Afghanistan, because even though it's been there for so long, the situation with the insurgency has gotten so much worse, and you have levels of violence that haven't been seen in years, even with U.S. troops there. So I think that's an indication that there are limits to the stability that U.S. forces can bring to Afghanistan. Final point, I think we were talking earlier about who can influence the Taliban, who has leverage. We could talk about that all we want, but at the end of the day, the only entity that has influence over the Taliban is the Taliban itself, right? It has a lot of leverage. It has the upper hand in talks. It knows that foreign forces are on the way out. It has the luxury of deciding whether what it hears, what is on offer to it in peace talks, if it's of interest to the Taliban, if demands are being made of it that it's not comfortable with, it can just walk away. So I think it all comes down to what the Taliban wants to do, and not what other external play, or a player in Afghanistan or an external player in Afghanistan tries to get it to do. It's going to make its own decisions at a time of its choosing.
Right, Michael, I'm told that we have to absolutely leave it at that. Thank you very much for your precious time. Michael Kugelman, thank you very much for your precious time. Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodi sir, thank you very much, sir, for your valuable input. And Dr. Nazir Mahmood sir, thank you very much for personally attending the program, coming to the studio. Viewers, you have listened to the participants. I don't have that kind of time to actually conclude on behalf of others. I think you have listened to their conclusions. That should hold. Let us hope in coming days we see a peaceful and prosperous Afghanistan and the region as well. This was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.